All right, we're now live on Facebook. Thank you everyone for your patience. I think Simone, you can take it away.
Sweet. Hey y'all, my name is Simone. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a confidential advocate and violence prevention education specialist with Raphael House. I'm here to introduce Erin Fairchild, our awesome speaker today. Erin is the founder of Collection Action Consulting, where she works with local and national partners to deepen our collective responsibility to prevent and intervene in all forms of violence: interpersonal violence, system-based violence, societal violence. She obtained her master's in social work from Portland State in 2009 with a focus on childhood trauma. Erin has worked with communities impacted by trauma for over 20 years in roles ranging from DV child advocate, child protective services worker, child and family trauma therapist, school social worker, trainer and curriculum developer, program and policy designer, and violence prevention systems manager for Multnomah County Public Health. Erin's work is focused on removing the barriers that prevent equal access to thriving for all people, to nurture individual and systemic healing, and to prevent violence before it happens. Thank you, Erin, so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I think I am ready to share my screen. Yes. One moment. Thank you all for being here. I'm super excited to share this space with you, even though it's virtual. I know lots of connections can and are made in virtual spaces. And when I am in spaces where people are dedicated to preventing and intervening in violence, particularly sexual violence, gendered violence, domestic violence, all forms of violence that impact us and our communities, I know I'm with my people. So it is a tremendous honor to be here with you today. Thank you for joining. My pronouns are she and hers. My name is Erin Fairchild, and I'm the founder of Collective Action Consulting. And I'm going to just go ahead and start off today's presentation and let you know I'm doing my best to speak at a pace that works for interpretation. If at any point I get passionate and excited, which is known to happen, and I start to speed up, any of you are free to let me know in the chat, and I will do my best to be accountable to that. It's an important accessibility issue. And I am also just want to extend my gratitude to all the interpreters who are here today, and to Multnomah County for making that option available for everyone in the space. So let's see. So I want to share a little bit with all of you about me and my work, just so you kind of have an understanding, a grounding, and how I'm in relationship to this work, and how I move through violence prevention spaces. I think it's really important to know a little bit about people's context and background as we face what's difficult together. So first thing about me that I think is really critical to this work is that I believe deep down, like in my bones, that violence is preventable. I don't believe that it is inevitable. I actually believe that we can prevent violence, especially when we work together, and especially when we look at how all violence is connected, and we try to dwell in a place of radical possibility for what is can be a different future and a different present. So I love this quote, even a fist was once an open palm with fingers. It reminds me that even when violence and abuse and harm and injustice feel impossible to overcome, that even the tightest closed fist can open again. And so I'm inviting you to hold that today with me as we explore possibility. So another thing about me is that I speak really openly, as much as I can challenge myself to, about white supremacy and all other forms of systemic violence and injustice. When I do so, specifically when I speak openly about white supremacy, I'm including myself in all of that analysis and all of the calls to action, because I am in a lifelong relationship with what it looks like to betray whiteness. I'm in a relationship with betraying whiteness because I don't exactly know if I'll ever get there all the way. So I'm just in relationship to that idea. And I try to integrate that into everything that I do, with a core belief that we can't mitigate violence and prevent violence if we're not doing that all of the time in all of our systems. So that's my commitment to you and to myself and to my communities. I come from, I won't repeat my work history. It was in the bio. It's always awkward to sit through your bio. And I have a vast amount of experience working with people who are survivors of multiple forms of violence. And I have received and sat with and held hundreds of disclosures of abuse from mostly children and youth and also from adults. And I know that if you are also doing this work, that you have felt that too, and you've held that space, which is why I'm so honored to be here with you, because that space is so precious. And thank you for doing it if that's in your role, to work directly with people who are survivors of abuse. But I have a background in domestic and sexual violence work. I have a background in school-based social work. I have a background in therapy. I have a background in policy and training and thinking about how we can move towards primary prevention of violence together through policy and training. My voice is acting up a little bit, so thank you for your patience. I also want to mention and kind of deepen into my own commitment about thinking about what social justice looks like as someone who owns a home on land that was stolen from Indigenous people. So I offer this commitment of words and action in every presentation or space that I hold, because I really believe that if we are going to promote environments where safety is achievable, that starts with us right now at every moment, and centering relationships and values at every turn. So I'm going to read this to you. And it's the words that you see on the page, and I'm going to try to read them slowly so they can be interpreted. So in Portland, Oregon, we must honor the Indigenous people whose unceded traditional and ancestral homelands we live on, the Multnomah, Caslamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other Indigenous nations of the Columbia River. Acknowledging the peoples this land was stolen from does not correct the grave injustice, though it is necessary to honor and raise awareness that we are in their rightful home. Our ongoing work for equity and social justice must work to right these wrongs every day in every way that we can. I also am going to offer another reading that I start a lot of my presentations with, especially when we are focused on violence. It's offered on the image, you see it in Spanish and in English. Hopefully that's helpful. A really incredible colleague of mine helped to translate that into, a colleague of all of ours actually, Jimena at Latino Network, translated this into Spanish. I'm going to read it in English. And it's kind of an offering to start in this space, grounded together. And I wrote this as a way to ground myself when I am a part of conversations that can be hard. So I feel my feet on the earth. I'm connected to my body in this place. I'm connected to my community. I work in service to the collective. I call upon my ancestors, both blood and kinship, to guide me to the wisdom of those who have come before me and those who share space with me now. I need my community to help me learn and unlearn. What is good for the whole is good for me. May I be of service. May I be a conduit, a connective thread in the shared garment. May this work fill my cup, and may we share in joy, love, and justice. The reason that I feel it's important to ground myself in words like these is that I hope for all of us, and I invite all of us to stay, as I mentioned before, in a place of radical possibility when we look at the depths of how violence is connected in our lives and in our communities, and that we bring a level of intentionality and groundedness when we do so. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, except to just say that my work is informed by many, many amazing people. It is informed by collective wisdom and experience. And so this is just my attempt to say names, or for you to see names written of people who inspire my work. It's not an exhaustive list. The list would be too long to show if I included everyone that I learn from and continue to learn from. So I already kind of mentioned some thank you, but I really want to spend some time here, as I believe and know to be true, that honoring ourselves and the work that we do as individuals and in community is crucial to thinking more strategically and radically and in truly justice-oriented ways about what's possible. We have to start by honoring ourselves and the work that we do. So I really believe that if you are here and you care about survivors of violence and you care about preventing violence before it happens, that what you bring to this work is incredibly precious and unique. And there's only one you that does it in the way that you do it. And I always have to remind myself that there's only one me doing what I do when I feel a sense of self-doubt. And I wanted to offer that to you as well. Another reminder that I like to ground myself in this work is that we can be heart-led in a world that wants us to be productivity-led. We can choose to stay in a place of being heart-led, even in giant bureaucratic systems, even in systems where the injustice is thick and deep. We can cherish and protect this characteristic about ourselves. It's crucial to our work, to staying afloat, and to imagining what the future can be like. I also want to acknowledge that you may not receive thank yous and accolades for the spaces that you hold. You may not be greeted every day with gratitude from all of the people that you support, because people show up in all kinds of ways when they use our services. And I know that when I was in direct service for many, many years, that the gifts of the work were always present for me. And sometimes it was hard, and it still is sometimes hard, to not sort of feel the recognition that what we're doing is incredibly important and incredibly difficult, especially in a world that normalizes and downplays violence, particularly gendered violence, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, child abuse, and all the violences that we're here to prevent. So I want you to know how much I value you and your work. I'd like to take a moment before we get more in depth into the content around primary prevention and thinking about policy and looking at some local examples and moving more into a place of what can we do together. I would like to invite a nervous system balance moment because it's really important, as you all know, that we bring intention about our well-being as we think through what's hard. So for me, what I know to be true about managing stress and trauma and vicarious trauma is that what works for someone else to be a grounding moment isn't always the same as what works for me. So I'm not going to tell you what to do to be grounded, but I am going to invite you in this moment to engage in some type of practice that you can do right now, wherever you are. So if you're standing, you can do it standing. If you're seated, you can do it seated. For me, sometimes I like to take a breath and shake just to get out some extra energy, maybe do a little stretch. I don't offer or suggest deep breathing as a practice for everyone as I lean into trauma-informed approaches, because actually deep breathing doesn't feel like neutral territory to everyone. Sometimes that's not a fit for people. So you may want to take deep breaths right now, or you may not want to. You might want to wiggle your toes and feel your toes in your socks or in your shoes. You might want to press your bottom into whatever surface you're sitting on. If you're laying down, maybe stretch your legs out if you can, and just take a moment. Maybe focus on the flowers in that photo and take a moment to be present right now in this virtual space. Thank you. It's always the challenge of our lives now as someone who used to do workshops and share space with people in real life to be doing it now all on Zoom is just a new way of being. And sometimes it's a little awkward and funny to me. So sometimes I'm just going to laugh. It's just the way I am. So I wanted to share with you my core beliefs and values as they shape my work. They kind of build off of the readings that I've done already. And I think that they shape the way I choose to and kind of hold on to engaging in this difficult work. So I've already mentioned that radical possibility is a place that I like to dwell in. What is possible beyond our wildest imagination in terms of justice and liberation and healing and thriving? I don't know that I've seen it yet come to fruition for everyone equally. And I'm really wanting to hold on to what's possible for us. So that's what I mean by radical possibility. I also believe and know that policy can change lives right now in material and real ways. I am very focused often on how can we correct injustice through policy. I also know that when I face the sorrow of this work, I also need to invite joy at levels, at powerful levels in order to create balance between sorrow and joy. And that is a value that I hold on to. I also believe and try to shape my work towards ideas of collectivity and interdependence, meaning that we are woven together and what is good for the whole is good for me. Another way I think about that is that no one is free until everyone is free, and that we move forward better together. I also know that this is not a shock, and you all, I'm sure, share this belief that injustice is violence. It just is. I don't need to say much else about that. Racism is violence. Homophobia is violence. Transphobia, ableism, classism, they're all forms of violence that intersect with interpersonal violence in really concrete ways that we can choose to. And I know you are joining me in choosing to interrupt. I also know that culture heals and culture needs healing. And that's a kind of complex interaction between being in touch with cultural practices that are supportive and help us stay connected to positive cultural roots and ancestral practices and knowledge. And for some of us, depending on our identities, that can be really complicated. And sometimes, for example, I know that there are cultural practices from way, way back that my ancestors engaged in that were healing. And there's also been so much hurt that has happened at the hands of my ancestors that they have perpetrated that also needs healing. So it's like all mixed up together. Also, that I know that relational integrity is critical to violence prevention and intervention work, meaning that I am constantly thinking about and choosing to engage in a way that aligns with my own integrity and that is matching the integrity of the relationships I care about. That is, how can I be in right relationship with people across identities? And a lot of that means my willingness to be accountable, and also my willingness to share in joy and solidarity with people, specific to our relationship and not just a set of rules or, it's like meeting guidelines matter. And also there's something below, beneath, above and around meeting guidelines that is about hearts connecting and people. So that is a way I choose to engage in this work. And that kind of completes the circle. And you'll see, I think, these core values and beliefs showing up in much of today's content. So I wanted to invite you to share in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so. If not, you can just think about it on your own or take notes on your own. When we sink into the idea of radical possibility, when you imagine a violence-free world, what words come to mind? And I want to invite you to not censor yourself. This doesn't need to be in a binary of positive or negative. It's just whatever comes to mind. Is it and not censoring yourself, and just sharing in the chat if you feel comfortable doing that. And I'll pause for a moment to give you a break from listening. I see sustainability, safe, abundance. Basic needs are human rights, sharing. One of the reasons I wanted to ask this question is because it fills me up in my work to know how you all can imagine that possibility. And, you know, some people, when I ask this question, they also feel things like impossible or never, or, you know, things that might feel more in the realm of, I can't even imagine that. And that's okay too. So I want to, you know, however you're feeling is welcome. The connection to the environment, shared power, justice, personal agency. Thank you for these. Equality. Yeah. I wanted to offer this as a question. I'm sure that many of you have thought about this before as you engage in the work that you do, that we sometimes, I think, in a world that normalizes violence, it's very easy to lose track of the possibility of a violence-free world, or, you know, getting as close as we can to a violence-free world, reducing, even if we want to say greatly or dramatically reducing violence, it's very easy to lose track of that. And I believe that we are facing a lack of, to be quite honest, policy decision-making. Sorry, I know it's tough on interpreters. I'm going to start over and make it more clear. When we do not stay connected to what is possible, our policy decisions and visioning is not as dynamic as it could be. And we have to do the work to stay together in connection to radical possibility to create the most dynamic policy solutions. And it's hard. And I struggle with it daily, and I want to be in community with people about it. When I think about creating environments where safety is achievable and where everyone gets to thrive, when I think about designing violence prevention policy that looks at how all violence is connected and looks at how we can prevent multiple forms of violence at once, it becomes really important to employ both and thinking. So to move away from the binary of either or thinking. Gender is expansive, gender expression is expansive, and really the solutions that we need to develop at the intersection of multiple forms of violence need to be that expansive. So I am constantly trying to catch myself when I am engaging in binary thinking, and that's something I encourage all of us in violence prevention work to engage in. We can do it together, we can do it in meetings, we can do it in strategic planning. Let's constantly be breaking the binary around our thinking. And when I say binary thinking, I mean either or, which often sets up a sort of like something's on top and something's on the bottom. Something has power, someone doesn't. That's what binary thinking creates. And it leads often to supremacy, right? So like I said, one element is above the other. And sometimes they switch places, but all of the nuance in between is lost. And when we are impacted by trauma and stress and injustice, it's very easy to fall into binary thinking. It's the lack of abundance, actually. Claire mentioned abundance as a word that comes to mind for the radical possibility of a violence-free future. And I think thinking outside the binary has so much to do with abundance, an abundance of thought and nuance that gets us in closer connection to what's possible from a policy standpoint. I also believe that we really need to break up our focus on how we frame violence, intervention, and prevention so that we can think all at once about the short-term immediate all the way out to the long view, that long view of a violence-free world. How can we break those steps down incrementally in a way that feels doable, requires us to move outside of thinking in the binary. Being trauma-informed is a way to work towards more nuanced thinking because when we hold space for how trauma impacts us, we can start to understand how it's easy to fall into binary thinking, into rigid thinking. And we'll explore that a little bit as it applies to policy creation and violence prevention. So I wanted to spend a moment focused on identity and trauma and healing and the domains in our life where those all live together, and how our ideas of individual, what it means to be an individual, to be in a family, to be in a community, and to be in society, that those domains of our lives also exist beyond binaries, and that we experience identity at all of these levels: the individual, the family, the community, the society. We also know that trauma happens at all of these levels: individual, family, community, society. And what's really amazing is that healing happens at all of these levels. From a public health lens, this is called the socio-ecological model. I'll say it again because I stumbled. It's the socio-ecological model that looks at the context of people's lives and how they all interact together. And those lines are dashed in those circles because all of those parts of our experience kind of blend together, and they are permeable lines. So, I think a lot about healing, how healing is not linear. We are not either healed. I'm not either a healed person or I'm not healed. I'm in a relationship with healing. And that's true for individuals, for families, for communities, and for society. And the way that we experience our identities shows up in different ways in all of these domains. And in order for us to get to policy and prevention strategies that look at the interconnectedness of all forms of violence and create strategies that can prevent multiple forms of violence at one time, we really need to be thinking about these levels of where identity shows up and how it shows up: trauma, healing. And I'm also noticing in the chat a comment, a request to not use the term people of color. Thank you for sharing that, Angie. If you have another term that you prefer, I invite you to share that in the chat, and I'll try to use what works for everyone. Thank you for mentioning how you're feeling about that. So I wanted to shift to now sharing a quote from, it's a quote I use often. So if you've been through training with me, you've probably seen this quote. I know that a lot of folks in Multnomah County engaging in violence prevention have used this quote. Gang violence is connected to bullying, is connected to school violence, is connected to intimate partner violence, is connected to child abuse, is connected to elder abuse. It's all correct. It's all connected. We operate in these silos that we've got to break down. And this quote is really at the heart of our work. And I know a lot of you are in this space of looking at how all forms of violence are connected and how can we move towards breaking down those silos. In my 20 years of doing violence prevention and intervention work, I've never experienced those silos being broken down. I've experienced attempts. We're all in a relationship with it. We're all attempting to break down those silos, but I haven't ever experienced those silos being broken down across all of those different types of violence. Sexual violence is not named specifically in this list, and it's also at the heart of this issue. So this is what a lot of today is about: is how do we break down these silos? So a question I ask myself in the work that I've done with Multnomah County, the work that I do with national partners engaged in violence prevention and intervention work, and the question that I have heard from many, many survivors of violence, from many of you that I work with, it's just a kind of a question in the air that I really try to spend time in, because I think a lot of the solutions exist in the question, which is, what is the overlap between forms of violence that happen in individual relationships, sometimes with strangers, sometimes with people that we know and love and thought we could trust, right? There's a variety of ways that interpersonal violence shows up in our lives. So this list is not complete. You can add whatever is missing, but interpersonal violence, meaning gendered violence, there's a variety of ways that people prefer to refer to. Gendered violence sometimes includes sexual violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, whatever word resonates with you and your community, child abuse, elder abuse, and bullying, violence that sometimes it's not just between two people, but typically it's interpersonal. And then we often have this other completely different silo that is community violence or gang violence. And people also, community members, have different preferences. So I try to be as expansive as possible in the words that I use, because it's definitely not up to me to decide for anyone what word resonates. So I typically don't say youth violence anymore, just to be transparent when speaking about community violence or gang violence, because to me, that implication implies that it's a problem that only exists among young people, and I have not found that to be true. Speaking of where it's my place to talk or not talk, quite frankly, bringing and thinking about community violence and gang violence is something that I have to be very intentional about and think about where is it appropriate for me to speak about that as someone who's not ever been a victim of gang violence. It doesn't impact my immediate family members. However, the reason I choose to constantly bring it into conversations is that I think my belief and experience is that whiteness and white supremacy have so much to do with why these silos remain so strong between gendered violence responses and community or gang violence responses. And I'll talk more about that, but I just want to be clear that I'm not claiming to have expertise in any way about being a survivor of gang violence, but I am claiming to have been socialized into whiteness, and that I know that it's important to me to constantly be creating space between how all these violences intersect. Otherwise, I fear that our movements continue to center white comfort. And I'll talk more about that. There's a premise there that I think is really important. And then when we look at systemic violence, so violence that happens in institutions and in systems, we see that those are often drivers, as you know, of violence, right? They contribute to violence. They sort of set up conditions where violence can thrive. And what's interesting to me, and what I hope our movements can continue to move towards, is that overlap in the middle. So the overlap in the middle is where I'm really interested in how can we spend more time in this space? What are the overlapping root causes of multiple types of violence, including systemic violence? And Claire's question, thank you for that question. That's a great question in the chat. Am I naming community gang violence separately from interpersonal violence because that's how our systems silo it? Or do I not see it as interpersonal? It's actually both. So I'm open, please share however you all feel about this. I separated them here because primarily our systems have siloed them in such intense ways. I also was thinking of it in a way, and the way that I've learned it from partners doing this work and other thinkers in this work, is that it is happening at a community level often. It can be. And interpersonal violence, which is the word sort of I'm using as a stand-in for sexual violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, child abuse, elder abuse. Sometimes those are happening. Oftentimes the lines are unclear and they're happening in groups. Also, the community gang violence is about group violence. That's sort of a distinction, and also primarily because our systems separate them that way. And I think it's important to understand and think about and just ask questions of ourselves and our systems of why we have these silos and how are they alike and how are they not alike, and why do we have these silos? I think that's such an important question, Claire, about why are we naming them separately? That's kind of like the question, why are we naming them separately? And we also need to be proximal and specific in our interventions, even when we look at where there's overlap. So I wanted to invite a moment of self-reflection now. we've I've been talking about it, so it's in the air. But from your perspective and your expertise and your lived experience and your professional wisdom, your community wisdom, the wisdom that's come to you from your family and your ancestors, and just being a member of systems, why do you think we operate in these silos? Why do you think that, for example, someone who intervenes or works to prevent elder abuse is often not in close connection with people who intervene and prevent community or gang violence? Or why has there been such a divide between the domestic violence movement and the movement to end violence? Some people call it gun violence. That's a whole nother kind of topic to me, because guns are present in multiple forms of violence. But why has there been this divide between the domestic violence movement and people who are working to interrupt community violence or gang violence? What might systemic violence, and specifically white supremacy, have to do with these silos? So I'm going to pause and give you a moment to reflect on that. If we were in person, we would break up into groups. But for now, it's a self-reflection moment. And please share in the chat if you feel like it. While you're thinking about it, if you'd like to share in the chat, please do, but no pressure. I'm going to take a moment to stretch and invite you to do whatever might feel good right now in that way. If you've been sitting for a long time or on a screen for a long time, it can get very exhausting. So Claire says, collaboration challenges power structures, and the state does not ultimately want that power challenged. And then also, we are all tired and exploited, and that makes this big work of breaking down silos hard. I mean, I'm trying to think for a word in addition to amen, but that's the word I feel is that, yes. I think I feel that deeply. Susie says to ensure that violence is maintained. If we see them separate, we might stay in the silo we've been in ourselves. Yep, they are funding streams. Thank you, Faith. I'm not sure if the way I'm interpreting your comment is our funding streams are just the opportunities and resources that we have make different groups work against each other, right? We're in competition for slim resources. To keep people and groups separate, I feel like our society is not comfortable with having equality or having people come together as one to figure out a problem. Silos protect the power dynamic that exists within organizations and bureaucracies. All of these things are barriers to thinking more collectively about solutions for violence in a creative way. Additionally, funding streams and politics, I'm looking at the comment from Sarah, typically kind of require us to engage in these very siloed ways. If we are being asked to develop a proposal for funding that involves a specific evidence-based practice for a specific type of violence, and there is a list from which we must choose solutions and strategies, often those lists are have been created by and from racist foundations or from ableist or homophobic or transphobic institutions. And also they haven't had equity and liberation and social justice at the forefront of good evidence either. So so I would suggest there are practical barriers to breaking down silos that ultimately support and prop up domination and power in many ways. And also sometimes it's just, we haven't figured it out yet, right? It's very complicated. Specifically, I will speak pretty openly about how in my experience, this is my experience, right? I already mentioned I'm socialized into whiteness. I'm in a lifelong relationship with betraying whiteness, and I don't know what the destination is, but I'm working on it every day, and it's a relationship. I'm a queer person who is a cis queer person who's often perceived as straight unless I'm with my partner who is genderqueer and non-binary. And so it's just, I'm currently able-bodied. I also know that that may not be true for the rest of my life. That could change at any moment. I also was raised in a working class, poor socioeconomic status, and now am more in like a middle class range. And all of those things contribute to my experiences as I navigate violence and violence prevention as a survivor of violence, and also someone who's worked with many other survivors of violence. So all of that experience, that lens that I bring, leads me to say that I really believe that centering white comfort in violence prevention movements is one of the primary barriers to breaking down silos. And so we're going to talk about that and kind of unpack that together. I think it's crucial when we start thinking creatively about connecting our work in deeper ways. Yeah, thank you, Jan. People living with disabilities are put in silos. Absolutely. I mean, and often made invisible. And, you know, when you think about the way that violence shows up in people's lives, being made invisible or not thought about or not cared for is a place where violence can thrive. And we are in the business of breaking up all of those barriers. In my experience, with that lens that I mentioned about my life that can't be undone, it's just inherent to how I show up in spaces. I also know that shared understanding between all of us is critical. If we don't have the same definition of what primary prevention is, if we don't all mean the same thing when we say prevent violence before it happens, we often miss the radical possibility and the most powerful solutions that exist for us to break down the silos and come together and ultimately, to use Claire's word, challenge the state, challenge systemic violence. And in order for us to intentionally work together and build strategies across these multiple forms of violence, we have to share definitions. In my experience as a violence intervention and prevention practitioner, we don't share the same definition. That's not just locally here in Multnomah County, it's also across the country. It also comes from our funders. So, you know, within one county government, you might have different departments defining violence prevention in different ways and funding what they call violence prevention, but they're very different strategies. That's also happening across the country in large and small ways. So I wanted to help us come together in some shared definitions that I did not create. These are kind of well-known definitions that exist in the world of primarily public health approaches to violence prevention. And I'm sure they're not surprising to most of you. And I'm sure many of you have a ton of expertise to contribute. Please do in the chat. So let's look together at what shared risk factors mean and what shared protective factors mean. I want to acknowledge that for many of you, you already know this, and for some of you, it might be new to you. In my experience, it's worth taking the risk of sharing something that some know already to make sure that we all have a shared understanding. If these definitions don't work for you, please alter, bring your own perspective in the chat or when you carry this forward in your work. So shared risk factors speaks to this idea that multiple forms of violence are shaped by common structural factors that I've already mentioned, you've all mentioned, many of you have mentioned in the chat, such as racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, policy enforced poverty, and all of the resulting inequities that contribute to how people experience violence. Type of violence, severity of the violence, and rate of violence. I'm going to pause for a moment and say that I choose to speak about poverty in a way that focuses on policy because I want my words to break up this idea that exists that poverty is based on people's individual characteristics or life choices. Also want to make it clear that poverty itself isn't necessarily a driver of violence. It just complicates all of the experiences in life around being a survivor of violence and around problem solving in times of stress. So policy enforced poverty is my attempt to put the focus back on me as a policy person and back on us and back on systems, to remind ourselves that poverty is not individual. It is an enforced system that has to do with policy. So we need to make different policy decisions. That's why I include that language. Shared protective factors on the exciting, hopeful, like let's take a breath of air side. Shared protective factors look at how multiple forms of violence also benefit from some of the same strategies, right? So when we think about how we can create systemic change that moves towards promoting upward economic mobility, equal and equitable access to dignity and safety and resources, and strong cultural and interpersonal attachments and relationships, those factors can prevent so many types of violence that, to me, it's very compelling to think about how we break down silos together across multiple forms of violence to create prevention strategies that we know can reduce and prevent multiple complex forms of violence. Why aren't we doing that? And it's all of these things that have been mentioned. It's not simple. There's sort of all the powers that be. There are the practical realities. There's the exhaustion. There's I am working with people in crisis every day, all day. How can I step back and think about the big picture? There's also the reality that for many of us, it's not our jobs to step back and think about the big picture because we are in the lane of direct service response to people who are hurting in real time in front of us. That is real. And I believe that we need, and I know that we need to create spaces where we get to think bigger together with survivors of violence. Often they are us and we are them, and people who access our services, to look at those shared protective factors and to move across our silos to get to a different place together. So another critical understanding that we need to share, in my opinion, is understanding what we mean when we say primary prevention of violence. So this is called the spectrum of prevention. It's informed by the Prevention Institute. A lot of work nationally, working with multiple communities and violence prevention and intervention folks, happens at the Prevention Institute. I'm sure many of you are familiar with their work. There's also other national organizations that are doing really exciting work. They have defined, in connection with community, that primary prevention really focuses on changing the conditions and the environment to prevent violence before it occurs. So primary prevention is often not about identifying people who are at risk of violence or who have already been exposed to violence or have already used violence in their lives. It's about stepping far enough back that we change the conditions before the violence ever even occurs, or before that close level of risk is there. So again, it's changing conditions and environments. It's not necessarily focused on individual level interventions. It can get kind of slippery. These lines are nuanced because we're trying to avoid binary thinking. So, what you define as primary violence and what you define as secondary violence and what you define as tertiary violence can vary a little bit. And I have found that we are not even in close alignment at all with across different types of violence with how we define what prevention is. So secondary prevention, the idea here is that we're talking about immediate responses to violence right before, during, and after that address the short-term consequences of violence. So it might be, you can share examples in the chat, of course. It might be helping people seek safety in the immediate moment of violence. It might be street level interruption of where we know that there might be gun violence in the community. So there's people on the street, engaging in relationships to prevent someone from shooting a gun. It can be, oftentimes domestic violence shelter is in the secondary prevention lane. And I also want to say before we go to tertiary that this is not a hierarchy. We need all of these types of prevention and intervention. They all matter. And if we want to invest and really speak truth to power and shift resources and investments, we have to be clear about what we mean when we say primary prevention. So primary is changing the conditions and the environment. It's rooted in social justice. All of this is, but I mean social justice, like shifting and transforming power and resources. Secondary prevention being, immediate responses before, during, and after. It's kind of like right in the thick of it. And then tertiary prevention being long-term responses and really more like intervention. Long-term responses to violence that has already occurred. A lot of people talk about criminal justice response as being in the tertiary lane, right? Like someone being in prison or jail or facing criminal justice consequences for violence that they used is often defined as a tertiary response because it can be long-term, right? A lot like you're removed from society is one way. That's a whole nother topic about what we think about that. But just the reality being that folks often describe criminal justice interventions as tertiary, but also it could be for survivors of violence as well. Tertiary responses can be long-term therapy to recover from the impact of post-traumatic stress, especially maybe around parenting, so that you are able to be with your children in ways that are safe and nurturing and supported. So I really don't want us to get so hung up on this because I've found that having this conversation sometimes makes people uncomfortable, rightfully so. The most important takeaway to me in doing this work is that the strongest interventions that disrupt the status quo, that disrupt white comfort, that disrupt capitalist enterprise as it relates to violence is in the primary prevention lane because it shifts resources. So a self-reflection moment, another break from my voice is where do you think the work that you do, that you're currently tasked to do, if you're in a community role, if you work for a nonprofit or a social service, if you work for the county or the city that you live in, based on your job title and your job duties, where do you think that your work currently falls on that spectrum? Knowing full well that many people who are engaged in violence work are asked to engage in secondary or tertiary and find ways to bring primary prevention into the lens. But based on what you're assigned to do, where does it fall? And I'll go back so you can see it. You can share in the chat or not. I'm very aware that this can be a sensitive topic for people when we're saying we need more primary prevention, and we're told that our work is primary prevention, and maybe it's not. For me, that was a big kind of mind-blowing moment when I learned more and kind of started applying more of a deeper social justice lens to my work, when I realized that the one-on-one advocacy work I was doing didn't feel like primary prevention. And it was a big moment that was not easy, to be honest. So I'm just aware of how that might feel. And to kind of think about that. Not a surprise, especially to people, a lot of people have been around the work happening in Multnomah County. If you live in Multnomah County, I think this is a pretty established fact. It might be changing now. I hope it is, but in across the country, not just in Multnomah County, the biggest investments are often in tertiary and secondary prevention efforts. Oftentimes, I have found that people are given funding under the guise of prevention, and it really isn't primary prevention. It's not changing the conditions or the environment in society. It might be changing the conditions and the environment in an individual family or home, but it's not significantly shifting resources in a policy-oriented way. And we end up seeing a lot of investment in tertiary and secondary interventions. Now, I also know, based on the conversation we had in the chat about silos, that all of those same concerns or barriers are present here in this conversation about primary, tertiary, or secondary. Is if there's someone in front of you who is about to be harmed or has just been harmed, it's a very real need to interact with them, respond to them, support them. And that doesn't go away. And it can feel like shifting gears or holding space for long-term primary prevention strategies is just not doable because of the people that we are supporting and the pain that we're exposed to and what it brings up for us as individuals. It can feel like a very tall order to now also engage in, long-term policy work. And for some people, it just doesn't feel doable. And I think that the revolving door of people impacted by violence without structural change in society is a very tall order. I think the expectation that we have to continue the expectation that we have to continue to meet the need of people impacted by violence without shifting the conditions in a major way that contribute to violence is a tall order. That's also too much to ask. And we're doing it. We're doing it because we have to and we care. And what would it look like if we flipped the script? What would it look like if we had more intentional, planned investments where we worked across our silos, across multiple forms of violence, to invest in primary prevention strategies that change the conditions that contribute to all of the types of violence we've talked about? It's possible, and it is actually doable and actionable. I always am going to come back to the reason we're not significantly doing it, in addition to all the practical barriers, is power and white comfort and capitalism, which, I can say that. And it's like, well, yeah, what are we going to do about that? And I guess today is about, there are things that we can actually do about it, starting by having shared understanding of definitions. So, because I feel like this can be this conversation riles me up, it might be riling you up. And regardless, it's always a good moment to invite some nervous system balance. So again, you might focus on the flowers, do something, I recommend or encourage you, whatever feels right, to do something with your body that kind of brings you back to the here and now. I like to stretch my neck a little. I can feel that. I've been gardening a lot lately and my body is feeling it. So take a moment to stretch if that feels right to you, or deep breaths, or a moment of distraction, whatever you need. So now, in terms of being practical and actionable and going sort of out of the realm of like the theoretical, right? Yes, capitalism is bad. Yes, white supremacy is terrible and everywhere all around us. Moving out of that, I don't mean to say it's theoretical in the sense that people aren't living through it, but sometimes it feels theoretical to think about how we get out from under it or how we challenge it. Now we're going to shift gears to look at how might we challenge it by getting organized, or I should say getting more organized. You all are very organized and doing amazing work, so it's never a denigration of the energy and commitment that you bring, and I think we can do more. So what does it look like to center primary prevention in policy, to look at how all violence is connected, and to start to develop those strategies that live at the center, at the intersection. So this is a quote that also comes from the Prevention Institute. I'm like a fangirl for the Prevention Institute, I guess. And also they developed this in collaboration with the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. Neighborhoods where there is low cohesion or where residents don't support and trust each other are more likely to have residents that also experience child maltreatment, intimate partner violence, and youth violence. To me, this is a really impactful way of summing up where we can look to solutions that can prevent multiple forms of violence at once and also shift and transform power and resources so that violence is not inevitable, so that violence is actually prevented before it occurs. I'm going to stop and ask in the chat because I'm curious what you all think, but when you hear the expression, a neighborhood with low cohesion, another way of saying it would be a neighborhood that is not cohesive and connected, right? What does that mean to you? What do you think that looks and feels like? There's plenty of examples in Portland, Oregon of neighborhoods with low cohesion. It can be social cohesion, it can be infrastructure. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, if you feel up to it, dropping in the chat what you think it might look and feel like, and what some of the experiences might be in neighborhoods with low cohesion. Lacking parks and other community spaces, gentrification. Gentrification is one of the biggest, greatest contributors, actually, like evidence-based and just experience-based to creating chaos in neighborhoods and breaking up cohesion. Neighbors that don't trust each other, where most of us live. Absolutely. Any other ideas? People working very hard to survive. They have less time to be together in relaxation. That can be what it looks like. Typically, neighborhoods that have low social cohesion and low don't have the resources they need to thrive in their living environment are underinvested in a variety of ways. And those decisions to underinvest are decisions. And that's why when I spoke about policy enforced poverty, that's really what I meant, is that poverty isn't just always, right, a lack of financial resources. It's what happens when you're forced into situations and environments based on your income level that reduce all of these other barriers, reduce all of these other access points to thriving. So if you can start to imagine, the next question I would ask is, how do you think that low cohesion in a neighborhood contributes to violence perpetration and also victimization or survivorship? How might that contribute? My water just made a really loud sound. I hope that you heard it because it was dramatic, but you might not have. Any ideas about how neighborhoods that are not cohesive might experience increases in violence? Violence can be generational, or also maybe this is also what you meant, Linda. Violence can be generational. Yes, that can happen in any neighborhood, any socioeconomic status. And what might be generational is living in a place that is completely disinvested in, which to sum that up is like the school building, is the schools in that area. It's not the district, right? Because Portland Public Schools, for example, is huge and there's a whole variety of neighborhoods. So it's not the district itself, it's the school building in that neighborhood is disinvested in. Teachers might be like making less money. There's less quality early childhood experiences. There's often a lack of infrastructure around transportation. You might have bus stops that don't have an enclosure and there isn't even a sidewalk. So you're on the side of the street waiting for a bus with no protection from moving traffic. It might be that there's a lack of green spaces and a lack of places to be in nature, not as much tree cover. There might be a food desert, lack of easy access to affordable, healthy foods, including and particularly produce. All of these factors also, I'm looking at the comment that Angie wrote, thank you for that. That often because of enforced policy, enforced poverty, and the connection to white supremacy, there's also often a lot of thriving happening in really creative ways in environments where there's low cohesion in the neighborhood, right? It's a both and, it's not a binary, and everyone deserves the resources of their city and county to invest in them and their neighborhood. And all of those conditions that can make it challenging to live in a neighborhood with low cohesion contribute to violence in so many ways because they reduce people's options to solve complex problems without violence. They also make it extremely difficult to seek help and support if you don't have equal access to resources, particularly financial resources. There's such an intersection. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. There's such an intersection between financial resource and accessing public services and who needs to access those and whether or not their needs get met. So looking at how do we increase neighborhood cohesion is a long known public health strategy for preventing multiple forms of violence. And I often don't see it coming to fruition. And you're probably not surprised. The reason I don't think it comes to fruition is because if we shifted our resources to create what people want and need to thrive on their own terms in their own neighborhoods, it would decenter white comfort. It would mean that we put caps on investment and where investments happen in our cities and our counties. And what I worry about and often, quite frankly, feel frustrated about is that when we focus on individual level interventions only, again, they're incredibly important. Don't stop doing them. Thank you for doing them. And when we aren't able to fund or get access to funds for larger policy level change, the revolving door of survivorship continues and the neighborhood stays disinvested in. So here's a local example. For those of you outside of Portland, Oregon, I hope this makes sense, but we know locally that we have two crises happening right now. They've always been present in our communities. The injustice has always been there. And right now, there's been a dramatic increase in people who are unable to access housing, people who are unhoused, right? And multiple forms of violence have increased. So in the past handful of years, COVID, yes, and also, honestly, I'm an independent consultant now, so I can say really bad policy decisions over many, many years that have fueled a crisis of people being unhoused, of my neighbors and fellow human beings I love and care about, not having access to long-term permanent housing, and an increase in multiple forms of violence that happens with guns, including the whole list of all the types of violence and other types of violence that doesn't always involve a gun. And we do have a really devastating rise in gun violence happening in communities. Some people call it gang violence, right? So whatever resonates with you. We've also seen a dramatic increase in domestic violence. I actually, if you know more, if there's been a dramatic increase in sexual violence, please share. I have not as much access to that information at the moment, but just dramatic increases in these two issues. And what I am endlessly frustrated by is that for the most part, these two big problems are talked about separately, not necessarily by all of you, right? I know you all are living in this nuance and call to action, but often by the people who make big decisions, we have the problem with housing and lack of affordable housing. People call it a homelessness problem. I think it's actually a policy problem. It's a greed and capitalism problem that is manifesting in the lives of humans who don't have homes. So there's that problem. And then there's the dramatic increase in gun violence and other types of violence. And they're often two separate conversations when we get to the highest level. When you're watching, council meetings or other, not always, and there's always advocates and champions. Many of you are those people. And I don't see a really I don't know, a dynamic question asking exploration. Let's get curious about the policy solutions that might reduce houselessness and reduce violence at the same time. How do those, because they are absolutely related, especially when you look at neighborhood cohesion. So that's an example. I don't have, I'm going to show you, sorry, start over. I don't have and would never suggest that me as one individual person could say, these are the policy solutions we need. That would be ego-based white dominance. I mean, how could I know? It's really based in community and the voices of survivors. Thank you. I'm being asked to repeat what I just said, which for interpretation, which makes sense. I'm trying really hard to move slow and I'm not doing that great at it. So I really ask for your grace. I'm going to keep working on this as a presenter. So what I'm saying is I can't tell you all of the exact policy solutions that we can use and advocate for, because to do so would be centering my voice as an individual white woman. And that's definitely not going to get us to the solutions that we need. I can offer some ideas of what other communities have done to move in to radical possibility through policy. How we manifest and bring forward this work is as unique as our communities. So this is really more about developing a shared lens and language to dwell in the future of a violence-free world. So for the interpreters, I am going to read these, and I know it can be hard. There's several text points on the slide, and I'm going to read them aloud. And then knowing that you all can access this content later if you want to revisit them. So, for example, some policy solutions that might address the crisis of unhoused people and uptick in violence in our community are housing and urban planning policy that caps corporate development profit in favor of affordable housing. So there are housing experts here in this. I know on this presentation, you will have really great ideas about how to do that. And thinking about it as violence prevention is not often that common to policymakers. And it's our job to remind them that access to affordable housing, as I think you all do, is violence prevention. Investing in affordable housing and capping what developers are allowed to do, taking our housing stock and making it unaffordable, we can say no. We can say enough is enough in a policy-based way. Policy that elevates the expertise of currently and formerly unhoused people who have had different experiences, including with violence. I wanted to shout out that I know the Multnomah County Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office has been developing and probably is currently happening an advisory board comprised of survivors of multiple forms of violence. And that's more of what we need, those groups to shape policy in a meaningful way. We can look at alcohol outlet density, so capping alcohol outlet density. We can increase equitable distribution of green space and other neighborhood investments. We can look at policy that planfully fills gaps across the spectrum of prevention. We can recognize wage increases as violence prevention and houselessness prevention. This is where we know that domestic violence advocates have long been working with housing advocates. More of that, more policy. We can redesign public school funding structures in favor of schools in marginalized neighborhoods. We can promote universally accessible, free, trauma-informed preschool. When Preschool for All was passed and started happening, it was very exciting to me. And I think we can continue to bring a violence prevention lens to preschool. What does it look like to be trauma-informed healing-centered space for survivors of violence, and how can we think about preschool as preventing houselessness and violence, and specifically preschool that is culturally relevant and dynamic for people from diverse backgrounds. Each of these policy areas are big, and I'm not suggesting that you now like, okay, you know what to do, right? These are large concepts, and I curated this list because I believe that there's possibility here to prevent multiple forms of violence and to decrease houselessness. And it's not just based on my belief, it's based on research and evidence and public health strategies that people engage across the country. I also wanted to put a plug for the second item on this list, policy that elevates the expertise of currently and formerly unhoused people with different experiences, including with violence. I want to elevate that again to say, yay, Multnomah County for doing that. And also other regions in the country have had more investment and opportunities to build advisory boards of people with lived experience, community members who have the information and the support they need to influence and inform policy in large ways, specifically for violence prevention and opt-in for housing. So that involves convening people and then the empowerment and education about policy. I think there's a lot of potential there to do more of that here locally. Those of you that are doing it, I know it feels like an uphill battle sometimes, given the complexities of our systems. And I just want to thank you for doing it. All of you for doing what you do, honestly. I mean, I have complete reverence for all of you. Again, just a reminder, I have to constantly remind myself this, that individual level interventions will create individual level change. Individual people are important. I want everyone to have access to healing and safety and well-being if they are a survivor of violence. And every time I see people with power making decisions to fund an intervention that's about teaching someone how to do something differently when it comes to violence, or a parenting class, no shade, many of you are doing those things. They can be incredibly powerful. I did them, I do them. They matter. And I have to ask myself, how does this displace resources though, for people with the most resources? It typically doesn't. So, you know, one question we can keep asking ourselves as we develop a lens or enhance the one you already have is, does what we're proposing to do, or what this funder wants us to do, or what the political pressure is, does it change the conditions that contribute to violence perpetration and victimization? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it's really messy. It does it all at once, and I'm not questioning that. And we can do more on the conditions part of it. We can continue to hold space and dream for what that might look like. I want to share, as we, you know, we're coming to an end here in 9 minutes, and we're definitely going to end on time. I also want to share this quote from someone whose work that I have long respected. I highly encourage that you check out her writing. She is someone I consider to be a very powerful thought leader in the world of violence prevention, Beth Ritchie. So this paper here that is cited at the bottom of the slide, The Effects of Violence on Communities, the Violence Matrix as a Tool for Advancing More Just Policies. Highly recommend. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend that you do. It's one of the best pieces of writing I've read in a long time about violence prevention in a way that feels revolutionary. There's tons of great work. I'm not trying to discount other work, but this one really got me excited, so I wanted to share. So she says, and I'm going to read this from the slide now, we can advance critical justice frameworks that answer key questions about what we might invest in to keep individuals safe, how we might help neighborhoods thrive, and how we might create structural changes that shift power in our society such that violence and victimization are minimized. More than rhetorical questions and naively optimistic strategies, these are real issues that must inform any discussion of the future of justice policy. So I want to pause for a moment and invite you to share in the chat if you have any reflections on that quote, or about if you're familiar with Beth Ritchie's work, anything you want to share. While you take a breath if you'd like, and I drink some water. And as you're thinking about that, ultimately, what I know to be true is that, as I've said already, we must decenter white comfort to get to the most dynamic policy solutions. And I have long found it interesting and noteworthy, to put it mildly, that in the media and in the way that violence is talked about in Portland and beyond, is that people say, I mentioned this earlier, people say gun violence and they mean gang violence. To me, that is rooted in white comfort and white supremacy. Multiple people in our community are harmed by guns, and multiple people from various backgrounds and races and identities have used guns to harm people. When I think about the insurrection, for example, and white supremacist gang violence, they are also using guns. But using the word gun violence as a stand-in for gang violence erases all of the types of gendered violence that happen with guns, coercive sex trafficking without consent, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, sometimes bullying, hate crimes. Guns are often present in those. And what's different about those types of violence is that it requires white people to look a little more at their own behavior. I also think it's deeply problematic that when we say gang violence, we aren't talking about white supremacy. That's a gang. People that move in white supremacy circles are acting in group violence. And these are really big issues, but we can bring them to the table to our policy discussions and our violence prevention strategies as examples of why we can look at how this is all connected and why we must look at how it's all connected. And doing that does decenter white comfort, because people are, well, white people with power, and I am a white person, I'm in this with, I'm in a lifelong relationship with betraying whiteness. Some of you are on the receiving end of the horrors of white supremacy. And I know that question has so much to do with preventing violence, because if white people remain in power and like to point fingers at violence that's happening in other places and not in their own homes and families, it often creates policy and funding decisions that are focused on individual level intervention rather than systemic change. So, creating environments where safety is achievable is something we're going to close on this as kind of a way to come back to that sense of radical possibility, things that we can do any moment, even when everything feels extremely overwhelming. And all of those barriers to moving out of silos and all of those barriers to doing interconnected justice change work when they feel like too much. These are things we can do right now, right? We can go back to our organizations and our communities and ask each other, what's going on in our relationship and our environment? Where do we need to do repair? That is violence prevention. How do we plan to navigate inevitable conflict that rises up between us internally and inside communities and then across communities, in our DV network, in our sexual violence and sexual assault prevention network, in gang violence intervention and prevention? How can we set parameters for repairing harm when we know it's inevitable? If I want my communities to be able to have harm repaired from injustice that happens from the government and society, I want to do that with my people too. I want to live it. Can we foster both and thinking in our work, in our policy suggestions and strategies? And how do our people know through lived experience, through relationships, that diversity of experience and diversity of identities is an asset to our work? It's not a subcategory. It's not an add-on. It is the heart of our work. How would we know that? How would people with diverse identities know that? If they worked with me, if they worked with you, if they're employed by your organization? Those are things we can all work on right now that can keep our move towards safety in our own environments that spreads out into policy. Also, when I think about creating collective well-being where everyone gets to thrive, I think, how are we centering joy and well-being, not just surviving and enduring, but joy and well-being for survivors who are marginalized by our systems? How can we do that in an advisory setting? How can we do that in community-based work? How can we do that when we are those survivors? Another question that I think we can always bring to the violence prevention table to stay in radical possibility is, what would it look and feel like if Black trans women had equal access to safety? Every single time we sit down to create a new idea, we can ask that question. We can do better about that. Where and how can we get more intersectional? That's kind of the next, like, how can we bring the most intersectional lens to all the things that we're doing? I can't tell you specifically how to do that, but I can suggest that we ask the question. What does it look like to share power and material resources with diverse survivors? It might not look like congregate care shelter with cots on floors, just to be bold. I don't know that it does. I'm not saying that's not important at some point, but I don't think it leads to long-term change. And we can ask these questions and try to wade through it together, just to start asking the questions, because I know, and I hope that you do too, I know you have this. Bring it, share it with each other, bring it to your staff meetings. There are possibilities for our collective joy and liberation that we haven't even imagined yet. And when I feel like I can't figure out what we might do to significantly shift the injustice we face and the violence that permeates our communities, I keep reminding myself this. I don't know because I haven't seen it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and we can stay in that place. And so as I close today, I want to offer you this, really meaning it with my whole being, that you might say this to yourself. I'm going to say it now as an offering to you. May I be held in care. May you be held in care. May we be held in care. The work that you do is so incredibly life-changing and important, and I applaud you. And I don't expect you to all go off camera as we change, but if you can clap for each other, and just know that you are movement makers, and I'm in awe of you. Thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. I'm going to close with in another invitation for you to shake and move and do what you need to get grounded. And here's my contact information and places you can find me. Take what resonated and leave what doesn't. Thank you so much. Go forth and enjoy any sunshine you can get access to.
Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks everybody for attending SAAM 2022. We were really grateful to have you all with us. So enjoy your afternoon.